I guess you can call this video a theme video because last time out I was talking about the pre-dominance Red Bull years, that period between 2005 and around 2009-2010 where they were stuck in mid-grid mediocrity and not doing much at all. And that was an interesting video, and I hope it was interesting for those who weren't around in those early days of Red Bull. In some cases, I don't think some were even born when Red Bull first came into Formula 1. And us old boys will remember when Red Bull was a logo splattered on the engine cover of a Sauber before Red Bull was its own team. And as one person pointed out, everything that's happened in the last 25 years or so was all because Peter Sauber signed Kimi Räikkönen instead of Enrique Bernaldi. Debate that as you will. And at the end of that video I talked about all good things coming to an end, empires falling and everything else that comes with it. The video I did detailing the sacking of Christian Horner has had a great response, and I'm glad that you like the whole putting it into one big timeline thing to help illustrate just how mental it's been over at Milton Keynes in the last, 17-18 months or so. But I don't want to dwell too much on who messed up what, because while milking a topic gets the most ad revenue, there's other stuff to talk about. For now. So for today's video I wanted to continue that whole building of a dynasty thing, or dynasty, I don't know how that word's actually pronounced, and look at the first Ferrari to take a drivers and constructors double since 1979. The Ferrari F2000. Sorry, not the F2000, the F1-2000. I can't believe that one slipped through the net. It's actually incredible how close Ferrari got in the years since Schumacher arrived. 1996 accepted because they were in a transitional phase at that point. But what if I was to tell you that there was a very real possibility that Ferrari could have won the driver's title in 1997, 1998 and 1999, if only for vastly different reasons? For those who were there to see it at the time, I'll give you a second to think about it, because it's a lot like reading the statistic that Prost was something stupid like only 18 points from 8 drivers' titles, or whatever that statistic is. Prost was better than a lot of people think he was, it has to be said. So now you've had a second to think about it, let's look at how close Ferrari got. In 1997 the title went to the wire in Jerez, with Schumacher leading the championship by a single point as they went into that race because Villeneuve had been disqualified at Suzuka, and I've done a video on that already. During that race, on lap 48, Villeneuve sent it into the hairpin, only for the Michael to turn in on him and it forced the German into retirement. Villeneuve had to do the rest of the race just one wrong bump away from his battery falling off the wiring loom. Villeneuve would finish the race in third, which was enough for the title, although JV did consider letting Berger through to take the podium in his final race. And actually, Coulthard almost let Villeneuve back through for second because he didn't know what Villeneuve needed for the title. McLaren must have known about the collision. I've done a video on Jerez 1997 as well, if you're interested. Moving on into 1998, Villeneuve and Williams were out of the picture, and the championship was now between Ferrari and McLaren. McLaren started off well, thanks in part to their magic brake pedal that was banned for the Brazilian Grand Prix, but Ferrari came back when Goodyear built some better tyres for the Argentine Grand Prix onwards. Hakkinen and Schumacher traded blows, with the penultimate race at the Nürburgring being a race that Hakkinen won on pure pace, and it once again went down to the wire, this time at Suzuka. But the unthinkable happened when the first start was aborted and Schumacher stalled on the restart, allowing Hakkinen an easy run to the finish, so long as his car held up. The Michael soared through the field given that his car was at least 2 seconds a lap faster than the mid-pack, but he was ultimately held up by his old mates Hill and Villeneuve, who had no obligation to let him through. But Schumacher retired with a puncture, and for the second time in as many years he had to sit on a wall watching his championship rival circulate to a world title. Then we get to 1999. Schumacher is sidelined for most of the season with a broken leg and returns 2 races from the end to try and help Eddie Irvine win the title. Schumacher allows Eddie to win in Malaysia, and once again a title showdown is set up in Japan, with Irvine leading the championship by 4 points. Now, there is a conspiracy theory that Michael didn't try in this race because how dare somebody win the title before him, but that's something for another day. But Hakkinen won the race in Japan, and Eddie was third, so Hakkinen took his second title by 2 points. So if you add up 1997, 1998 and 1999, Ferrari is a total of 9 points away from 3 consecutive drivers' titles. That's an average of 3 points per season. That's how close they were. So as Formula 1 entered the new millennium, Ferrari was really on it now. They'd won the Constructors in 1999, so that was a start. The next thing was getting the Drivers' Championship, something they hadn't won since Jody Scheckter in 1979. This would be the 21st year without a driver's title, even though they'd won the Constructors in 82 and 83. But the Tifosi expected nothing less than Schumacher winning the championship. Ferrari was, like mentioned, 9 points from ending their banter years. And they had the team to do it as well, because working on the 2000 car, named the F2000 because, well, it's the year 2000 and it was hard to not find something without 2000 in the name around that time, was a star-studded lineup. Rory Byrne, Giorgio Ascanelli, Aldo Costa, Marco Faniello, Nicolas Tombazis, James Allison, Ross Brawn and Gilles Simon. To show you how stacked that team was, imagine having a five-a-side football team that had Oliver Kahn in goal, Paolo Maldini in defence, Andres Iniesta and Zinedine Zidane as the midfielders, and up top, prime Dennis Bergkamp. It was a wonder how they hadn't won anything already. The car was mostly an evolution of what had come before thanks to massively stable rulebooks in those days. There hadn't been much in the way of rule changes between 1999 and 2000, apart from the rule being put in place that banned anything other than a V10, something that forced Toyota's hand when they came in. Aside from that, the rules were basically the same with regards to bodywork and tyres, as Bridgestone was still the sole tyre supplier that year. Michelin wouldn't come in until 2001. Ferrari had got somewhat lucky in 1999. The McLaren was a glass cannon and retired too many times for them to make it count. On the other hand, they'd been unlucky with Schumacher's injury at Silverstone. And in 1997, 8 and 9, the Ferrari had always started on the back foot, and had done similarly in 1996 to an extent. It was left floundering in the wake of Villeneuve's Williams at Melbourne in 1997 to the tune of 2 seconds and then half a second in Brazil, and was about half a second to a second from the McLarens in the first couple of races in 1998 and 1999. So there was plenty to fix, although it must be said that this model I'm working with here is not an F2000, just heavily based on it. Ferrari targeted weight reduction first, going for a design that was under the weight limit, but then they would use tungsten, which is denser than lead so they didn't have to use as much, to make sure that the car was always 600 kilos when it was checked. Because the pieces of tungsten were smaller, they could be more selective with where they placed it, and that would in turn help with the handling and tyre wear. 2 pieces of tungsten were cut into a V shape and then placed around the splitter region of the car. Now, I'm no engineer, but I think this was to put more weight over the front end and help with turning and help mitigate tyre wear, but that's just a guess. The nose was made slightly higher than what was on the F399 the previous year. While chasing weight reduction, the design team was also chasing aero. And as mentioned in a dedicated video, the high nose arrangement was so that less bodywork obstructed the front wing and the airflow over it was better. Although as rules changed and aerodynamic knowledge got better, the noses got lower and lower again. Ferrari also lowered the centre of gravity with the engine, completely redesigning the 3-litre V10 to improve the centre of gravity and the weight distribution. Paolo Martinelli's design team began with designing an engine with a wider V angle than the commonly used 72 degrees. They initially went to 80 degrees with the Tipo 047 in 1998, which had a centre of gravity height of 204.5mm according to Motorsport magazine. They modified it further to chop another 7mm off that height for 1999 to make it 196.5mm, but for 2000 they managed to make it 187mm. Basically, Ferrari was making the centre of gravity on this engine lower and lower and lower and lower. It's not the most technical description in the world, but it all adds up to big gains. Motorsport magazine also described how the engine was constructed. 4 titanium valves per cylinder with a pneumatic valve spring system, with very carefully placed oil sprays keeping them cool, and extra work done to the air intakes to help keep the whole engine cool. Variable length intake trumpets helped with the torque delivery, and the throttle and gearbox were fly-by-wire, which meant that the car could be smaller thanks to not needing any extra cable linkages. 823 horsepower or so is what this engine was supposed to give, but there were still some slight drawbacks. Tyre wear. It was still getting through tyres faster than the McLarens, and the McLaren was regarded as being faster, if a bit more fragile. But Ferrari was going to be making constant upgrades to the car over the course of the season. Schumacher meanwhile spoke to the media prior to the start of the year and said that this car was going to win the championship. While previous years had been, "we could" and "we're confident we can get close," this year it was, "we will be winning the championship." And at the Australian Grand Prix, he laid down one hell of a marker. Once again, the McLarens were faster, and Ferrari were once again half a second off the pace. But when the race began, the McLarens kept their positions, but Schumacher was keeping with them. When the safety car came out to tend to Pedro de la Rosa's retirement, the field was neutralised, but Coulthard had to pit on lap 10 with engine problems. He went back out but retired on lap 11. Hakkinen would lose his engine 7 laps later. So after qualifying 3rd and 4th, the Ferraris finished 1-2. Schumacher would have preferred to race the McLarens properly to show how good the Ferrari actually was, but I don't think any Ferrari fan was complaining at the time. Schumacher would win the first 3 races of the season, with Hakkinen not scoring points until round 3 at San Marino. That's when Ferrari updated the car with new brake ducts and a new rear wing, with Ferrari running the 1999 ducts in Australia and Brazil. Hakkinen was second to Schumacher at Imola, but at Silverstone, McLaren was back to winning ways. Silverstone was in April that year because reasons, and Coulthard won the race with Hakkinen in second. And the McLarens had endured a tough couple of opening rounds, because Hakkinen had taken pole and retired in Australia and Brazil, with Coulthard being disqualified at Brazil for having illegal front wing end plates. McLaren and Mercedes had identified the problems on the car, with the failures at Melbourne down to an air filter failure that knackered the pneumatic valve spring system in the engine. They modified the design, and they looked to have it solved. That's my wife's favourite F1 car, by the way, the 2000 McLaren. Yeah, she's got good taste. But either way, when Hakkinen won his first race of the season at Barcelona, Schumacher still enjoyed a 14-point lead in the standings, thanks to McLaren's issues. But because McLaren had managed to get their cars in between the other Ferrari of Barrichello, because Irvine had left at the end of 1999 to go to Jaguar, McLaren was only 5 points off in the constructors' standings, with both teams enjoying a pretty big gap to Williams, with Benetton and Jordan scrapping for 4th and 5th. More upgrades came for the Canadian Grand Prix, the suspension pushrod being mounted to the wheel uprights before bringing newer and larger barge boards for Manicourt. It was front wing and diffuser changes for the Nürburgring, and at Hungary, Ferrari brought the side pod chimneys due to concerns about the heat in Budapest. But after the very strong opening to the season, by the midpoint of the season it looked like the wheels had fallen off at Ferrari. It was looking like 1997 in a way. Schumacher had enjoyed a very strong start, with the only time he'd be off the podium being in Spain. At Monaco, the Michael retired with exhaust and suspension issues, but he did win in Canada. After that though, it was 3 successive retirements at Manicourt, Austria, and the legendary wet-dry race at Hockenheim that was won by Barrichello, this being the Hulkenberg getting his podium of that particular era. In the interim, Coulthard had taken wins at Monaco and France, with Hakkinen winning in Austria, so this ended up bringing the championship closer together. When they left Hockenheim, Schumacher's lead had been cut to just 2 points. Schumacher led the standings on 56 with Coulthard in second and Hakkinen third. They were level on 54 points, but Coulthard had achieved slightly better results, so it's written the way that it is. Schumacher 56, the McLaren's on 54. 6 races to go, so still everything to play for. But Hakkinen had a resurgence, winning the next 2 races in Hungary and Belgium. The unthinkable was starting to happen. Ferrari's chances of winning the championship couldn't slip away again, could they? This would be the 4th year in a row. And since I can hear it brewing in the background with the "why didn't you mention" or "you forgot to mention" crowd, I'm well aware that that Belgian Grand Prix is the race where Mika and Michael zonta. I haven't forgotten. I need to do a video on that in the future. Anyway, moving on. There were 4 races left: Monza, Indianapolis, Suzuka, and Malaysia. One was the home race for Ferrari. Another race was brand new to the calendar. The other 2 were very much Ferrari tracks. It looked like things were going to swing Ferrari's way, but they couldn't count their chickens just yet. But it didn't matter in the end. Schumacher went and won all 4 of the remaining races, and he took the championship in Japan, so he did it with 1 race to spare. After 4 years of trying, it had finally happened. The banter years were over. The final results are on your screen. The Malaysian Grand Prix didn't mean anything for the championship, but the Michael won all 4 of those final races to take the title, 5 years after he did it at Benetton. The race at Indianapolis could be considered pivotal, with Coulthard getting into the lead early and Hakkinen eating into Schumacher's lead after the pit stops. Michael had been given the lead after a penalty was given to Coulthard for blocking on lap 8. But Hakkinen never got close enough to challenge for the lead, because an issue with his Mercedes pneumatic valve springs caused him to retire. If he had managed to overhaul Schumacher and overtake him, the championship would have been kept alive, and Mika would have kept the championship lead. Hakkinen had entered that race with a 2-point advantage, but left 8 points behind. But if Hakkinen had won that race, Michael would have still taken the championship in Malaysia. For the constructors, Ferrari won by 18 points, which at the time was considered fairly comfortable. The McLarens just had too many issues, and the Ferrari emerged as a better all-rounder towards the end of the season. And it helped that Schumacher was driving it, obviously. But you also had Ross Brawn doing strategy on the pit wall, and even when the Ferrari didn't have outright pace on the McLarens, the Ferrari pit wall managed to bring the cars closer and end up taking wins through racing smarter rather than faster, like at Suzuka. But it was one of those seasons where the Ferrari would be faster one week and then the McLaren's faster the next. Just one of those seasons, really. Both Ferrari and McLaren were massively ahead of Williams, who in turn was 16 points ahead of Benetton, who drew equal on points with BAR, with Jordan down in 5th and starting their downfall after their epic 1999 season. But I've covered all that already. At the bottom, you had Prost. They'd only get one more season. Ferrari and the Tifosi were overjoyed. It had been over 2 decades, but they finally had a drivers' champion again, and Jody Scheckter, the previous Ferrari drivers' champion, led the applause. Luca de Montezemolo was happy that after 3 close calls they had finally done it, and Schumacher ended up on a list of the all-timers of the time. He was still 2 championships behind Fangio and 1 championship behind Prost, but his 3rd world championship had drawn him level with Stewart, Lauda, Brabham, Piquet and Senna. And since the year 2000, only 3 more drivers have achieved 3 world titles or more, those being Sebastian Vettel, Lewis Hamilton and now Max Verstappen. There you go, there's your pub trivia for the day. Is there any more pub trivia I can give you from the 2000 season? Oh, it was the first time a Brazilian driver had won a Grand Prix since 1993. Rubens Barrichello won at Hockenheim, which is the first time since Senna won in, well, 1993. It was where everything melded together, and it was a combination of everybody doing what they had to do. They spent the money wisely, they were meticulous in what they did, and Ferrari supposedly clocked up 19,500 miles in testing alone during that one season. McLaren, by comparison, did just over 14,000. Ferrari logged those testing miles over 125 days, and the design brains of Rory Byrne and Ross Brawn, with Paolo Martinelli making the engine as good as it could be, as well as Brawn being able to strategy Michael back into winning contention when Hakkinen passed him, such as they did at Suzuka, all added up, led by the bloke who got stuff done, that being Jean Todt. So it's a car that was the end of one era and brought Ferrari into another. The banter years were over and Schumacher and Ferrari would take things to new levels, achieving a period of domination not seen since the 1988 season. Between 1999 and 2005, it was 6 consecutive constructors' titles and 5 consecutive drivers' titles. It beat the previous record set by McLaren, who won 4 drivers and constructors' doubles in a row, and was a record not surpassed until 2021, when Mercedes took 8 constructors in a row after doing 7 drivers and constructors' doubles in a row. For Ferrari fans, this is an important car. It ended one era and ushered in the new era, the era of Schumacher dominance. And every single season there's the hope that the Ferrari car that comes for whatever season is coming up next, like the 2025 season for instance, has that same spark. Will it usher in a new era of Ferrari being back to the front and winning loads and loads and loads of races? But we always focus on the 2002 and 2004 cars. But without the F1-2000, those 2 cars wouldn't have had the success that they had. So then, a look at the car that kick-started the Ferrari and Schumacher dominance years, the Ferrari F1-2000. If this has been interesting for you, then do give the video a like so I know I did a good job, and for more stuff like this from the channel, get the subscribe button clicked and also get that bell on so you never miss out on anything else that I do around here. Massive thanks as ever go out to the mad lads over at Patreon for the continued support, and if you want to help with the picture purchasing piggy bank or just keep the lights on around here, there's a link to Patreon in the description along with links to Discord, socials, affiliates and any other bits and pieces you might want or need to know. Or the super thanks for the one and done donations, and thank you to those who have sent me some coffee money in the last few days, and there's memberships as well for those who want to Patreon but without the Patreon. So until next time, I've been Aidan Millward, have a great day wherever you are, and goodbye.